everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Points on the Circle. Today's episode, I had a wonderful conversation with David Joel, who has been a longtime member of the congregation, is a professional photographer, and was president of the congregation when I interviewed to become rabbi here in 1998. I hope you enjoy it. David Joel, it's really good to see you. Thanks for coming on here. How are you?
It's a pleasure to be on with Rabbi Elder.
Rabbi Elder? You're calling me Rabbi Elder? What's that about?
Well, this is the formal blog, the formal podcast. Yeah.
So I tell everybody you were president in 1998 when I interviewed.
By the way, I choose to call you Rabbi Elder in certain contexts. I have no arbitrary. Maybe many of us have that same attitude. There's certain very slight nuances that make me say Rabbi Elder.
Yeah. What do you think that's about?
That's about the confluence, the overlapping roles that you have with all of us, and your personality, and your generation. For example,
I find it, but go on. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say with Rabbi Marks, I did the same thing, but it was the equivalent of saying Mr. President, and then every once in a while being alone with the person that you've known for 25 years and calling that person, Robert in this case, by their first name.
We've spent a lot of time together over the years, a lot of really nice time. I have not asked anybody in any of these podcasts yet, how did you get to Hakafah and when was it? Because you were not a founder, but you were in the first generation.
Oh, that's really easy.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't the first generation. I was the first and a half generation.
Go ahead.
We moved to Wilmette in August 1989. And we moved at the time, we were 2 doors down from Sandy Gelber, and then we became 3 doors down. And I was out in the alley that very first week, and Sandy was out there, and I asked her, just not assuming she was Jewish or not, but just guessing something, asked her if she knew any rabbis. And she said she belonged to Hakafah, this is August 1989, and she said to look up Rabbi Marks's phone number, and don't be confused because there's a child's phone number at the time. I think it was his son's phone number was in there also. I believe his son's name may have been my name. So I did that, and that's what I did.
So you gave him a call.
Sorry, what?
You just gave him you cold called him.
Yes, which I'm used to. Yeah, so we went quite quickly, or I went. Susan was. We had been members of a variety of congregations in the city. We moved from Edgewater Glen for the schools, exclusively for the schools. And we had been with the temple at Granville and the Lake, whose name escapes me.
Emmanuel.
Correct. I was going to say that, but I wasn't sure. And then we were with another temple in Rogers Park, whose name escapes me. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Maybe Mariah or something like, not Mariah, Menorah or something like that. Anyhow, okay,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So when we moved, I started looking. Susan and I had agreed early on that I would handle any Jewish education of ours. We had the 2 kids by then, Max and Sam, who were 5 and 3. But she never dreamed I'd actually get involved with a synagogue.
And Sam, so that's part of the conversation I want to come back to. You know, Sam was my first assistant teacher in 7th grade. Yeah. You don't remember that Sam was my assistant teacher?
No, I remember him being in our Rachel Mikva's class, but not your assistant teacher.
Yeah, he was my assistant, along with Ruth's son, Moskovich's son.
Oh, Isaiah.
The 2 of them.
Oh,
no, the other Owen. The 2 of them. The 2 of them.
Owen, Sam's exact age, of course. Yeah.
So I want to ask this just briefly, and then I want to get off of Hakafah and get into you, because I do have a couple questions that I have for you based on our conversations. But so you have seen the arc of Hakafah from 1989 to now. Right. Talk about what you've seen in that. What does that arc look like to you?
Well, this will sound a little strange because it has more to do with the institution than with what the institution teaches or represents. But what it has to do with the institution is even though I have no institutional ties of any kind except with Hakafah, and no experience with institutions personally, whether being on boards, until right now I'm on a board of an institution, whatever it might be, I was startled as I got into the leadership and now the arc to have almost no contention during all this time. So there's something about the structure and of course the people, but it may have to do a lot with the structure that has allowed for a true collegiality over this long a time.
I think that's really interesting. I have noticed that people love the place, but they don't care. And what I mean by that is that they don't invest in that stuff that causes the tension between people. They don't hold on to their own personal stuff, the bureaucratic stuff. That's kind of what my
That
reaction to what you're saying.
structure aspect.
Yeah.
But I'm not so sure. We had issues, needless to say, and it wasn't that people didn't care or that they didn't care enough to make things contentious, but the nature of the situations, which were, as you might guess, over 30 years, were almost everything you could conceive of,
Sure.
even down to hiring decisions about a whole range of people, including our rabbis. They did not generate the kind of, well, you're called the bureaucratic interactions where people had a certain kind of stake in an ideology.
That's what I meant by caring. That's what I meant by that.
Yeah, no, I knew what you meant,
Yeah.
but I think that they care a
Yeah.
lot, but we're also relatively homogeneous. So the cultural norms were shared by everybody. And you and I both know what those norms are. Some of them are reverse norms in the sense that they create a sense of superiority, the no building routine, of course.
How much we love ourselves. So, so this is what I want to jump into with you, because through your work, and I love that picture behind you, photograph behind you. I just love how it's, I know, I just love it. Do you have a green, are you green screened?
No,
No.
it's a virtual background, yeah.
You and I have talked over the years a lot of how you have found yourself in a lot of different sacred spaces with your photographing through the Archdiocese, through friendships you've developed with different folks of faith. Talk to me, if you would, talk to us. How do you define sacred space for you through the photographer's eye?
Well, you just suggested sacred space as being literal, being involved with Catholic Charities, being involved with the Evangelical Lutherans, going to their facilities, their churches, their houses of worship, and being really very involved personally with their people at all levels, from the highest level, as the person I've talked to you about before in the Catholic Church, to all of these relationships that I develop. But the sacred space question I never thought of, because I'm more superficial than that. I'm just seeing things. I'm seeing only superficially what's in front of me. So I'm not delving into them.
I'm going to push back on that if I can. Were you done? I don't want to interrupt you.
I'm not sure I meant that either, frankly, because delving into them is exactly what I do. But
thank you.
But the superficiality comes to play that it's quick and it's irregular time-wise. So sometimes, by definition, the intimacy that I develop with people is commercially, it can be phony by its nature, of course. But in the real worlds that I'm in, which are most of the worlds I'm in, the intimacy is the sacred piece, the sense of being able, I fancy I can see through people, with the emphasis on the word see, and not the conventional meaning of see through them. I can see them just instinctively. As verbal as I am, most of what I do is instinct, and that's how I see. So if you're gonna ask me to define the sacred space, it's with people, it's seeing into them.
And yet, I mean, and so, look, you have incredible photographic empathy. And what I mean by that is, I tell Eli as he's going into music, right, that when he's playing, he's got to tell a story or have a conversation with me. I have to feel like I'm engaged with him in a conversation. And the work that you have put forth with only the stuff that I've seen, which has been limited, definitely is evocative of an empathy of relationship that you are engaged in. That comes through, even your commercial work.
Yes, I frankly agree with that. And that's what I strive for. As you know, my dad and many of the people that I've been around have been not only professional photographers, but at the top of their fields on many levels. And there's a man I saw, who I met when I was a child. His name is Henry Domin, French. And I'm going to give a talk about him at my Yom Kippur session. He's a Holocaust survivor, which he's 87 now, which nobody knew until nobody. He never told anybody.
Wow.
And he's one of the premier photojournalists of the 20th century. And he is able to do just what you described. His images are seeing into things in great profundity, even the most ordinary seeming picture. And that's what we all strive for. That's that sense of being an observer. But superficial is not at all what it is, as you were starting to.
No, you're a vessel, you're a vehicle, you're a pass-through.
Pass-through in some ways, yeah. But also it's not a anonymous pass-through. It's filtered through our sensibilities and our way of thinking. And a good way to represent it to a non-professional photographer is something I never tell my clients or the people I'm photographing. But the truth is, the picture is not about the individual. It's all about me, which is a weird way to put it. Is that it's what I bring and how I see the person and how I interact. And there's lots of ways to skin a cat. I'm something of a chatterbox, but there are other photographers that just sit there and observe and let the person kind of key off of the photographer's energy. The best example is the famous Joseph Karsh picture of Churchill, which you have certainly seen, of him pulling the cigar, where Joseph Karsh just kind of sat there. And with a big camera, he only got a couple of frames, but that one he kind of waited and observed. So it was about Joseph watching, and that's to a degree what we all do.
Have you ever had a quote unquote religious experience behind the lens?
Oh yeah, loads of times.
Okay, what is it? Talk about it.
It's an easy description because I've thought about it and talked about it, and I can't pronounce the guy's name, but you'll recognize it. The philosopher at University of Chicago, Cesar Minesky, whatever his name is, who wrote the Flow stuff. It's a big, thick book I've read, but nobody can pronounce his name. I'll send you the link to it.
That's okay.
What it is.
Uh-huh.
You've heard of it. I just can't pronounce the guy's name.
That's okay. Go ahead.
What that's about is that as an artist in any field, and I bet you have this from time to time yourself, is I very regularly go into what's called the zone, where I'm completely unaware of time. And sometimes it's just momentary. And it can often be in the most prosaic situations. But I'm so tuned in. This is a classic artist's experience, frankly. It's not just me. But for me, that is the experience of being out of body almost. And I've had that a lot.
So why do you define that as religious? I mean, that's an interesting description. Why to you is that religious?
Because it's a combination of profound and it's beyond my normal way of thinking. It's a different place. And so maybe I'm defining being religious as being a different place, being an above place, again, in Robert Marx's terminology, in the up-down format, rather than a circular kind of format, the way Islam might describe it. I learned that from Robert. That's one of the few things I remember verbatim. At any rate, so those experiences, because they're profound for me, and they're momentary, but sometimes they have a reverberation, and I'm aware of them a lot days later, the experience itself. And in retrospect, the interactions with people makes me very humble sometimes, humbled.
It's amazing the amount of ego it takes to be humble. I'm not calling you ego, but what to put yourself, to have to put yourself in that space in order to let yourself go, so that the result is that we can experience you as the vessel and not you as the barrier to what you're trying to portray. It takes a lot. It takes
the barrier I relate to. I don't want to be that, and that's meaningless and doesn't work.
Yeah.
But the vessel, again, it implies a conduit. I'm not quite sure that's what.
Filter, but a filter, that is a filter. I mean, to be a conduit is not to be pure. It's to filter something that we can get something out of.
Conduit can just be an open pipe, as it were. So you're just transporting from one end to the other.
Fair. Much better. You're right.
I think of it more, even not as an filter, but as an interpretation. Again, classic way people talk about artwork and interpretation. And of course, again, this is another obvious thing about photography, which has been endlessly talked about from Susan Sontag's period, is the photography is oddly surreal for obvious reasons, that it's two-dimensional and the real world's three-dimensional, but it's also a cutting up of what you see in front of you, a cropping of it. But it's also surreal in the sense that it's an interpretation, and it may or may not have anything to do with anything else other than itself.
And yet so much of your work is people and so much isn't. That piece behind you isn't, and it's so stunning. And the work that you've done, the professional commercial work you've done in steel mills and other places, you've been a lot of places photographing all over the world nonstop for a really long time.
Yeah, well, the way I pose it to my clients as a pitch is I've been everywhere, literally everywhere, not physically, but in every conceivable category except the military, which I'm interested in.
So what's I want to come back to that in a minute. I don't want to let that one go. Where has been, do you have one spot that sticks out as the aha of aha moments, the Kodashim, when you think about it in terms of you capturing a moment? No, really?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just such a state of
being. Quickly is that even the picture behind you was just an incredible adventure. It's 50 kilometers out into the middle of the Atlantic. I'm in a helicopter, tiny helicopter, leaning out with just a automobile seatbelt with no top on the thing, going only 60 miles an hour. So it's an adventure. So there's no aha moment being able to capture. I work exceptionally fast and really instinctively. So I'm not doing what again, the main job of photographers' names, but Cartier-Bresson, with the decisive moment, would talk about waiting and waiting and waiting. And there was that decisive moment, and he would capture it. I don't work at all like that. I just watch and continuous and search, and I keep moving. So there's no moments that I can separate out. Now, the end product, I could look at it and say, yes, perhaps that's, when I edit, that's what I was looking for, or that's the quote best picture. But there's no aha moment that I've shot it and then I know that I've accomplished something. It's a process and it's a feeling.
So has that experience, so I started thinking of waiting for Godot, right? Is if you're always waiting for Godot, you're never going to find Godot. But it's if you're always in a state of movement, you might catch it at one point. That's what I started thinking as I was listening to you.
No, that's exactly not what I'm saying.
No, I didn't say that's what you were saying. I said that's what I reacted to. There's a big difference.
I see, yeah.
I didn't say that. I know you didn't say that.
That smacks of just randomly taking pictures. And of course, eventually you're going to.
No, I didn't mean it that way at all.
You wouldn't suggest that, but that's not at all how it feels. Because when you work professionally at the level I fancy I'm at, they're all excellent pictures.
You're in a state of being. I get that.
Yeah, you're gradually moving towards something that not in advance. Any artist would say that.
So that religious experience that you said you've had all the time through work, has that ever translated in Judaism? Have you ever had that feeling in the space that you call your religious upbringing, your sense of Jewish self?
Yes, and I know exactly when, and I think I've mentioned it to you. It was the times when I was president of the congregation and I would carry the Torah from the Ark to Robert's trunk and put it in the trunk. That was an extraordinary moment for me. And
Why?
I did it. I looked forward to it.
Yeah, why?
Again, I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but it was also unusual and beyond the normal structure of how we behave as Jews. For a layman, it's not unusual for a layman to carry the Torah around, certainly not during service for the obvious reason, but that kind of activity was unheard of, I suppose. And yet it was still the Torah, and it still represented everything it always represented, and yet put into a very common, I call it prosaic, day by day kind of existence. So the dissonance of that was so profound for me. I still think of it from time to time.
Anytime you want to come and put my Torah in the trunk for me, you're more than welcome to. How did you feel about putting it in the trunk? Did that bother you?
No, that's just a talk about a vessel. Yeah, I could put it in the back seat. Trunk is just our way of thinking about burying something out of sight.
Did you grow up at a congregation?
I grew up in a well-known congregation in Westchester County in New York. And Robert knew my rabbi, who was an extreme liberal civil rights type of rabbi named Michael Robinson. who probably died only 20 years ago. He's probably a little older than Robert, but I'm not sure. And remember, Robert was in New York for a long time and knew a lot of the Westchester County Reform rabbis.
Mhm.
So Michael Robinson had a tremendous effect on me, tremendous.
How so?
I was, well, I was, the confirmation class, I think, is where I really formed the relationship with him. You know, my 10th grade, it's the same routine. And we did it, I remember it like it was yesterday in our synagogue with the big Presbyterian organ. You know, that was really loud. So we had a service with the confirmation class, but we did this almost a play-like thing where we read things. I think I read something about Isaiah that I had written. And the rabbi had really tutored me and worked me through it. And when I was in college, he also spent a lot of time with me helping me construct a conscientious objector,
Mm.
which in retrospect was more like writing a college essay.
We're going to have to bleep that out, by the way, but go ahead.
The man who judged that essay was the principal of the high school, who was like Mr. Potter, not behavior-wise, but the kind of look, kind of old style, very conservative guy, but knew me very well. Mr. Kellerhouse, Dr. Kellerhouse. He must have had a PhD in education.
You like growing up in Westchester?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't mind living there now. You've been in northern Westchester. Yeah. Oh, really? It's near. I grew up near Chappaqua, where Clinton lives. I grew up in Croton-on-Hudson, which is where the movie Reds occurs, where all the commies from the city came in the early 20s and bought these rambling kind of cottages in the hills above the Hudson River. And I grew up in an all stone house that was built from the stones that were culled from the fences that the Dutch pulled. The Dutch pulled the stone out of the ground to make adequate farmland and made fences out of the stones, and they're all still there. And the developer, who was Arthur Haut's father, I think.
Oh, that's right. You told me that before. I forgot that.
Houses, and it was on a street called Woody Brook Lane with no numbers. So it was very rural, very New Yorky, very liberal New Yorky.
And you've been here for 30 years, 40 years. I just lost you. Are you there?
Yeah, I've been in Chicago. I went to school in Chicago, so I've been here for 50 years.
Yeah, and you came from music, right? You were going to be a pianist?
No, I didn't get into Oberlin. I didn't get into the conservatory.
I thought you came here for music.
Oh, God, no. There's no music at the University of Chicago.
I know there isn't now, but I thought maybe there was there. But you're a jazz pianist or classical pianist?
I'm a classical pianist. And I didn't get into Oberlin, which is where I wanted to go. You know, you audition, and you know the routine with your kids. And I didn't get into Brandeis, which was the obvious place where Jews applied.
Interesting. So you've been here in the Midwest for 30, 40 years, and the photography. So your father was a photographer. You were talking about instinct. Talk to me about your instinct. Was that one that you always had, or that you developed, or that it was a learned instinct? Where did you get this passion for photography?
I don't have a passion for photography.
Where did you get this instinct? You give me the words.
Photography was a total default for me. Total. I had some life episodes in my 20s which distracted me greatly from everything. And photography became a way to make a living, and ultimately to really understand those pieces of me that we've been talking about, maybe even the religious piece, and to exercise it. And this will sound strange coming to this, but as a 15 and 16-year-old, my parents sent me to a place called Shaker Village, which was in upstate New York, that was reconstructing a real Shaker Village. And it wasn't a summer camp, it was a work camp format. So we were rebuilding the barns and all this, and I was in Shaker service. But I learned all the music. And the famous one is the one that Aaron Copland used, is in Appalachian Spring. "'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free." So that's a Shaker song, of course. And that's not until I was in my mid-40s did I start to recite that to myself, that I realized I had come down the punchline in that song is come down in the place where you ought to be, or something like that. And I felt finally that I was in the right place. And that has been reinforced more and more, because what I was trained to be, as you would guess, is a professor. All my friends are professors, even big shot, or specifically big shot professors. And we're now on a little every 3 weeks kind of interactive thing during
Oh, that's
COVID.
fun. That's fun.
Yeah, it's been weird. Different, you know, it's going back 45, 50 years. Though some people in Chicago, who like Suzesh, who you know, who
Yeah.
I was a classmate of mine. But I always assumed I should have been a professor. But now in retrospect, and my friends tell me I was not suited for it. I talk too much, you know, not collegial enough in meetings, and I moved too fast. Point being is that it took me a long time to have a passion for myself, not for photography per se. The doing photography as an artist, I'm passionate about, because you can't fake that for 50 years, even specifically commercially, and expect to make a living. But it's not a passion of mine.
Okay, that's fair. So you mentioned something really interesting there. I talk to people all the time about, according to our tradition, you can't study Kabbalah until you're 40, mysticism. You don't study it until you're 40.
Yes,
And we talk, yeah, but we talk at Hakafa a lot about it's not the age 40. It's what 40 represents in Judaism, right? Which is this idea of going through a cycle of self-awareness, self-learning, in which you had an assumption that was wrong that you had to learn from, that you have to then go through this process and come out the other side. And when you come out that, if you're lucky to, if you know yourself well enough, then you can be prepared to start living, to start going to some depth, to go to get into some meaning. And here, that's what I just heard you talk about for yourself, right?
Boy.
Not so profoundly, but in a sense, you just said you came into yourself after a series of experiences in your 20s, that you came in your mid 40s somewhere, which wasn't the age of 40. There are people who are 20 who are 40, and people who are 80 who never turn 40, right? So what was that? You have this awareness of a coming of yourself. What did that mean? What does that mean?
Well, you repeated virtually verbatim what I said. You're right. And that's what I meant as I was saying it. So I know it sounds strange, but I'm not sure I have anything else to say.
Did it open yourself up? Were you able to see things differently, learn things differently? What's been the impact over the subsequent score of years?
A reduction in anxiety. I know the answer to that very quickly.
Hmm.
So that sense of being in that Shaker song, being in the right place, which I've had some intimations might have been fooling myself to think that, but I'll let that go for the moment, because now it's too late. I'll be 70 in a month.
Happy birthday. 70, really? We have to get your second bar mitzvah date going. You know, when you turn 83, you get to become a bar mitzvah again. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, but I'm not nearly, it's not going to take me that long.
Anyhow, go ahead.
I had an 8th grade education in Judaism in here, so I can recoup that. Quickly.
I'll get the DJ. Anyhow, okay, go ahead. You were saying, so what were you saying? I interrupted you.
I was trying to understand what had really changed in me and what the outcome of those changes were. And one of them was a reduction in random anxiety, and a sense that I was what I wanted to be, not in spite of myself, but just by an evolution without any calculation, which is maybe the point, is since life presents you with things that you're not going to control or calculate.
Yeah, and that was
So
in the, I'm sorry, go ahead. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I seem to have organized my life better than I realized. I'm something, or maybe specifically a pessimist. And that has helped me tremendously.
What do you mean?
Well, I've been waiting for catastrophe. And when I felt all the anxiety about catastrophe in advance. And I remember when the first depression hit 10 years ago, I was greatly relieved on some level, because not only was I prepared for it emotionally, not that you can prepare, but I was aware of it emotionally, so it didn't hit me in the face as hard as it might have. And it's the same with this catastrophe.
So you think we're in a catastrophe now? That's a very strong word.
You would not agree with that, or you would just you wanted my comment of
Yeah,
my sense.
I'm just asking the
Yeah.
question. I haven't heard it expressed as a catastrophe. I have to think about that, but that's a really strong word.
Well, maybe that's a pessimist's way of thinking about it.
Say
Yeah.
more.
Well, the catastrophe, in terms of the content, it's fairly straightforward. It's a way you interpret it. It's everything at once. It's a destructive kind of situation, and the likelihood of recovery is problematic. That maybe is part of the definition of catastrophe. Everything has changed. I mean, January 2020 is year zero of the old world, or year 57, whatever it is, of the old world. Now we're in month 7 of a completely new world.
Hmm.
And we see it in every level. I mean, I have grandchildren, and I have one grandkid who's actually in a nursery school. He's the only kid in America in school. Sounds like a catastrophe to me.
So you're looking. So I would suggest that if we can call this a complete, I'm not convinced we're in a complete new world right now. I think we might be transitioning into what will become a completely different world, but that's going to be a slow process. And isn't that what life is? Isn't that what time is? It's just a rolling of moments that are evolving into something else. Sometimes they're mundane, mostly they're mundane, but sometimes they're significant.
Catastrophic. This, by any definition, in my mind, my mother, who's in very good shape, is 92, and she lives, I've talked to you briefly about her. She has a big enough apartment by New York standards with air and light. She's been out of the house 6 times since March, literally out.
Yeah.
And it was hard to get her food in April and May. The point is that she sees this as the greatest catastrophe she's ever seen in her life of 92 years, even in comparison to World War II. Her birthday is June 6th. She remembers June 6th, 1944, waking up with all the bells.
Wow. Wow.
So this is a catastrophe on so many levels.
Yeah. So I think of, the great flu, the influenza of last century. I think of the Black Plague that lasted 300 years, right?
This is a catastrophe on those levels, particularly given the population of the world. And the world is completely different, as witnessed by how we're conducting our conversation. This isn't a transitional way of doing it. This is the difference. This is the way it is now, and we don't know the end point of this.
So where do you find, since we started talking about holy and spirit and religious and what have you, how do you find spiritual or holy, or however you want to frame it, religious moments, if we're experiencing catastrophe? Do you find them in this space? Can you find them? Have you found
much
them?
easier to find? Infinitely easier to find.
Go ahead.
For example, again, even on an ordinary prosaic level, since at least I do, you don't have time. You're working flat out, I suspect, maybe even more than you ever did. But I'm just sitting here. I used to travel 3 cities a week. As of my last trip was to New York in early March, and then everything got canceled. So I've been just sitting here, which I haven't not enjoyed. It's a big change, but it's allowed me contemplative time, not depressed time, but time to think. So this whole process is a religious experience for somebody like in my situation. Now, I happen to have enough resources to survive, so I don't have that anxiety, which I know many people have. So I have the luxury, it's a bizarre and perverse luxury, to sit and just observe on a completely different level from what I do professionally. So that has been quite an opportunity for me. And I noticed it at the film group Saturday, is I watched all these people, and in these Zoom things, I don't know if you've noticed it, but I don't talk as much as I usually do. I don't interrupt as much.
I have noticed.
Yeah, I thought that. And I didn't say a word in the film group. It was a little after my bedtime. But I usually talk a lot, as always. So I've been content to watch. But mostly what I felt is all the people there, I was so lucky because I know them over a period of years. If I were a newbie, I wouldn't be able to get to know them in this media. And that's the catastrophe as well. So no matter how much we talk in this form, we're not going to know each other.
So that's really interesting to me, only because you and I have been going back and forth now for over 15 years about the value of the internet. And you've always been, it's opened up new opportunities and new ways for people, and you've got connections in ways that you haven't had before and all that. And now
Absolutely.
you're framing it in a different way where we're seeing the limitations of it. You're
No, 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 not at all. We're seeing the great advantage of it. What we're seeing the limitations of is the inability to interact in person. That's the
Right.
limitation we're experiencing. That's not a limitation of the technology. Of course, we're 10 years too early with what I'm calling a catastrophe. In 10 years, we'll have enough bandwidth for hologramic things. And you and I will be sitting around and drinking cups of coffee in my living room as a hologram, and we'll be able to detect each other's nuances of body language
Mm.
and add some smell and stuff, whatever you want. So hologram will make, there's a wonderful Arthur C. Clarke story about it. Only 10 big estates left in the world, all occupied by one person. They never see each other. And then the punchline in the story, the point of the story is that one of them has got to see another human being in the flesh. And that's the story.
Now I'm going to switch gears right here, because whatever you just said right now, I started thinking about you. You are no dummy. You are incredibly thoughtful. You've incredibly well read, and you're a Francophile.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And where did that come from? And what's that about?
Oh, that's really easy too. I had I could see the first class in junior high or in elementary school. I had the same teacher, Mademoiselle Teneyck, who must have been 24 when she started teaching. Now she's living with the biology teacher from my high school, and the two of them have a beautiful house near Lake Placid.
Mm. That's great. That's great.
And I never, so it's Miss Teneyck, and I forgot Miss, what's her name, who was the two Mrs., where they ultimately got together. At any rate, Miss Teneyck, I was in an experimental class that was financed in Westchester. So there were 6 people in this class for 10 years.
Wow.
And it was the same 6 people with the same teacher through my senior year in high school. So I know more French literature than I do English literature because I learned it so systematically. And I read all the time, et cetera. And I have a lot of French friends, et cetera, et cetera. So
And okay, so what about it do you like? Is it just because?
it's like what they all say. You may or may not feel this with Hebrew. It's made a tremendous difference in my life for a lot of reasons. One is, remember, I have an international clientele. So an American who can speak a foreign language is considered brilliant, which is absurd. I speak quite well, but not completely fluently, but I can pass for the first 2 minutes, though my sister-in-law, who's French, says, yeah, she rolls her eyes when I say But the reason it makes a difference is that as a photographer, you're endlessly underestimated as what some of the things you said about me, which is being smart or educated or well-read or all the rest. And so much of what I said earlier, my personality has to be brought to bear instantly when I'm working professionally. It had to be brought to bear instantly in Hakafa too, to join the leadership, because the accounting partners didn't want me to be the operations treasurer. How could a dumb photographer? It didn't make any sense, to them. So you have to prove yourself endlessly. So that's by force of personality. So having the language skills has helped me push myself forward in America. It's quite interesting. I have a bunch of French clients, so it's helped commercially. But it also gives all the things we all read about, which gives you an insight into other cultures and a sense of how other people think.
Here is my little second generation Holocaust brain chiming in. And that is the irrational side of me has this visceral reaction to Jews who are Francophiles.
Yes, I've heard that before.
And so respond to that. Like, what are you thinking? Now, I don't actually believe, maybe I do really believe that, and I fight against that.
You
Right?
may or may not know a lot in your own estimation about France or about French culture. You may have some sense of French history related to the Jews, which we all, know. I've been to Reform synagogues in Paris, as you have in Eastern Europe, where it's the same and everything is the same, and I don't like the French people particularly. For example, in Paris, the way it works, and this has to do with the Jewish piece, the French are the most arrogant people. They make New Yorkers look collegial.
Hmm.
In Paris, if you speak French terribly, people are very gracious and comfortable with you. But you may know this about French culture. Everything in France is about language. That's why the French Canadians were so eager to have the word toilet paper put on in the stores in Vancouver, because that represented culture to them. So if you speak French quite well, as I do, they'll talk back to you in English,
Mm.
even though it's quite clear that you understand and can talk. So this is that arrogance. So it's just a in the provinces, not so much, but it's just a very difficult setting. So I have no great admiration for the French, but I have tremendous admiration for their culture, and I love the language.
And yet the culture is a product of the language and vice versa, and the people. It's all intimately linked, and that is a culture that, as highbrow as it is, not, I mean, look, German has its same problem. It's anything in Europe, but there's something that France, to me, represents Europe. Right? When I talk about Israel and the early Zionists, I believe that the early Zionists, the Ashkenazi Jews, thought that they were going to the Middle East and creating France for Jews.
I've never heard that. I always saw it as Germany, of course.
Yeah, but there's something about Germany, to me, it's always been more about France, because France represents everything that we always aspired to in terms of acceptance of intellect and culture and what have you, and that rejected us the most. Now, Germans did it as well, but there's something about that culture that when I hear that Jews are Francophiles, again, I think Israel's predicated on it. At the same time, aren't we just turning a blind eye to the fact that they have never particularly liked us, that culture never particularly liked us, wanted anything to do with us, and is quite content demeaning us?
Yeah, well, as you were saying that, what European world nation is not like that? What European nation has allowed, other than the British, I suppose, allowed some Jews to thrive, other than France?
Yeah, but yeah, that's true for a period of time, on
Mhm.
and off, right? But you don't hear about very many Hungaryophiles, or Czechophiles, or even lovers of Spain, in the same way that there's something about France that represents the pinnacle of culture in a way that even Germany doesn't.
Well, maybe that's how I am too. I hadn't thought of that. That's what I meant by I know I can recite French literature in French. I can't do that. Maybe some Mark Twain. So that's a form of being educated. I can recite Victor Hugo poems today, or parts of them without. So that's a form of.
I'm gonna have to bleep you out so much on this thing.
Sorry, is YouTube have a
No, but Hakafad does. But anyhow, go ahead.
you're hot. But I've gotten quite good at editing QuickTime, because I've been doing my critiques and then I edit them, whatever I do. Um, but yeah, I've never had anybody ask me about this in greater detail, particularly as a Jew, the aspect of being Jewish.
Yeah.
Francophiles are people who like French language and read French literature, and I love listening to Macron and this Henry Domain movie that I'm going to do for my thing. I'm editing it. I copied it and I'm editing it for little snippets. And I listened to them over and over because French is so exquisite. It is French. And the educated curators, the art curators in Paris, they speak French in the most mellifluous, perfect. And it's such a delight to listen to it. So that's an artistic experience having nothing to do with France per se.
I got like 2 or 3 more questions. We can keep going on for a long time around this. So you just mentioned something about as a Jew. Do you normally refer to yourself as a Jew or as a Jewish person?
As a Jew, for sure.
Say more
Because
about that.
I'm so Jewish. And I've been all around driving, and I can tell people see me as Jewish. I remember in North Carolina and in Salt Lake City, I just had this sense. So I feel Jewish.
Okay.
Which I don't mind. I don't feel discriminated. I didn't know I could apply to Yale University when I was 18. I'm not kidding. That's the only time I remember being so aware of being a Jewish person that in my mind, I was excluded. In my mind. A kid, you're younger than me, ultimately went to Yale.
Yeah, You so coming back to this as the Jew, and you wear it and you're fine with it and you're comfortable with that. When you're in these other religious spaces where you've been, the archdiocese, the evangelical church, all these places where they know you're Jewish, they know you're a Jew. Tokenism, talk about it, talk about your relationship, talk about being in those spaces consciously and owning that Jewishness.
Yeah, well, I told you this story once, you may not remember. Around Easter, I was in one of the evangelical Lutheran worship spaces, and the pastor gave me this, some of my best friends are Jewish mentality, just a little, but mostly he said off the top of his head, you people, he used that terminology, you people have screwed up Easter by making Passover and Easter not always the same day. I told it was better than that. He was more
Yeah, no,
extreme.
I remember. I remember.
Yeah, this really startled me. It was so obvious what his mentality was about Jewish people, not about me personally in the
Mm-hmm.
least, but he had thought about these aspects and he found himself so separate as opposed to being a successor to the Jewish tradition. And the dates are skewed, he knows perfectly well the differences in the calendar, etc. But he blamed the Jews.
Hmm.
Something that inconvenienced him professionally.
See, but that's an exception, or do you get that sense in general?
That's an exception.
Talk about the other side of it. Talk about being the representation in a way that's felt positive, and including this relationship you have with this young priest.
Who's not so young anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I guess he is by my stand. Yes, I have felt just the opposite most of the time. I've been greeted and absorbed. That's an interesting way I just put it. I've been to, again, I've been everywhere. So I've been to, I have the Lutheran service completely memorized. It's almost as easy as the Jewish solid, it's a flat hour with the same liturgy over and over
Well,
and over again, all over the country.
Where do you think we got it?
Sure. No, I'm not going to get it, but it's the same principle of something predictable and short, at least by our standards. Well, I think I've told you this too. I greatly admire the evangelical Lutherans, which is, some people probably have no idea, something of a misnomer. They're not evangelicals. They're actually the extremely progressive
side of the Lutherans.
progressive side of. I've even been to the church that was thrown out of the whatever they call it, from having a gay.
Was that in St. Louis?
No, it was in Atlanta,
Ah,
and they had
okay.
a big sign about how we all support our pastor, and there was some. I thought it was a police action or a court case. It was they went to the archdiocese court with him, but the point is that these people have really welcomed me, and I have even told a couple of the pastors. One woman greeted me as I arrived in probably Minneapolis, and she was the pastor. She greeted me saying she was the second lesbian pastor in the history of, now there's zillions of them, evidently. The point is, I found myself telling some pastors, some, maybe more than two, that if I only believed in Christ, I would be interested in being an evangelical Lutheran, because of the culture and the nature of it. So I'm greeted and accepted. And I find with the Lutherans, at least, I need to tell them that I'm also progressive Jew, because they have that mentality that Jews are hidebound and inflexible and
Really?
exactly conservative, but take their religion so seriously they feel affronted being around other people's religions. So they have that view. This is my opinion. This is not something that I've been told outright, but that's my sense.
Interesting. To me, it would be more of just being so foreign and having preconceived ideas that they feed into it, because of how foreign we are to a lot of evangelical Protestants throughout the country.
Well, I'm not that foreign to them for the reason that I'm not what they perceive as a frum Jew, presumably. I'm guessing, I guess. But that's my sense emotionally, which is what you asked me about. So I feel accepted. And the Catholics, the Catholic priest, he's one of my best friends. And this guy runs an entire order now. I told you he's at the same level as the head of the Jesuits. It's called Mother Superior or Big Superior or whatever, the word superior. Really, that's part of his title.
I get it.
Yeah. I just communicated with him. He's from northern Saskatchewan, and he's French speaking. As a side note, this is a small French Canadian community there.
Huh.
And he doesn't see me as the house Jew. He sees me as a confidant and a mentor. He's described me as one of his mentors. I've known him since he was 19. He's 36 now. And that's been a remarkable revelatory experience to me. The most extreme way I'm his mentor is represented by, maybe only a year ago, we went to the Greek islands for lunch. These people don't eat that well. They don't have, I'm not kidding. So I take them out to lunch. And we sit on a bench near the Greek islands with my car parked literally behind us. We're sitting on the bench, and then behind us is my car and a meter. And we're talking and talking. We get up, there's a ticket on the car. We had been so absorbed.
You didn't notice.
Yeah, no, it's the meter man.
Did he pay it?
What?
Did he pay the ticket?
No, they don't have any money. he felt guilty, but he was also startled by it, the intensity. And he's telling me all this private junk about the usual local yokel archdiocese types. At any rate, it's an intense form of relationship which transcends anything I've ever had. Those kinds of relationship, having nothing to do with my religion. I went to one service of his just this January that he conducted. He was installed as the next level of Mr. Big. And he gave his, I'm not kidding, he gave his homily with 1,000 people. And he saw me there in the audience, and he eyeballed me. And he's, this place smelled of incense and all the, I don't know if I had never been to that kind of,
wow.
It was quite an extraordinary.
Well, so this brings us back to the beginning, and with this we'll start to draw to the close, is that this is how long we have been together, because I remember when you first met him. And because we've been talking about it for that long, and it's been
unusual for me.
Yeah. And and thinking back, David, for the now 22 years that we have known each other, it was 22 years in March that we first met, and the experiences we've had and the intimacies we've had and the back and forth that we've had, and the gifts that you have given me as someone in your life that I've now had an honor to share a little bit of with everybody else at Hakafah.
Thank you, and that's completely mutual. Bruce, I remember walking around my house and Wilmette with you.
You remember that? You remember that? I remember that like yes. I remember you when we. Do you remember walking in 2000 when I wanted to do Shabbat in the woods, and I took you out hiking with me in the middle of nowhere and the hike, and you just and you don't do that stuff, and you just came with me. So there's been a lot that we have. You still haven't taken me on one of your shoots. I still want to be one of your assistants. I was just telling that to Noah.
You've also tolerated me as being something of a naysayer, off and on, or what my mother calls a Moishi Kapara, a purpose personality in some of our sessions.
No, but that's gifts, man. That drives community. That that allows interesting dynamics and transformative moments to happen. You've got a wedding coming up in a few weeks. Still happening? No, it's later. Okay.
It's at least a year and a half.
Okay.
Just guessing. They were going to get married in New York in October.
Right.
They decided not to do that even.
Or that's where I thought you were still at. You've got a grandchild with your other son. You got a lot of good things looking. Two. I'm sorry, I forgot the other second. So you had a
older than a year and a half.
Oh, God.
Well, you can't keep track of. That's something I've been observing of you. You keep track of so many people. How can you do that?
Because because the nature of our space that you were talking about, the nature of Hakafah, right, is that we're in this together and we share together, and that's how. So you're all part of my life. So and I feel so honored from that and by that. So you got some good stuff coming through this catastrophe that hopefully shows some light. And thank you for being a light for me. So. Thanks for taking the time here. We could keep going, but it's been great. And
I
with that,
when I saw how long Carrie Frumpkins was, I said, my God, what are we talking about?
You'd be surprised. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. And to everybody, until our next episode, take care. We'll see you. Bye-bye.